So I'm going to get started reading here, getting everything set. Got my coffee, got my book, my notebook nearby. So I'm going to be reading from our Declaration, a reading of the Declaration of Independence in Defense of Equality. It was written in 2014 by Danielle Allen. She's a professor now at Harvard University, although if you look in the back cover of the book, you will see that she, when she wrote the book, was a professor of social science at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. And she's a political philosopher widely known for her work on justice and citizenship in both ancient Athens and modern America. She lives in Princeton with her husband and 2 children. So I picked this book because it has such an unusual and interesting and exciting story. In just 1,337 words, the Declaration of Independence altered the course of history. Written in 1776, it is the most profound document in the history of government since the Magna Carta, signed nearly 800 years ago in 1215. Yet, despite its paramount importance, the Declaration, curiously, is rarely read from start to finish, much less understood. So why are we reading this book? A good reading starts with checking the book out, which we already did, looking at the front cover flap, and looking at the table of contents. So the sections in the book: the origins of the Declaration of Independence, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the art of democratic writing, and since this is a critical thinking and writing class, this is going to be an interesting section we're going to take a close look at. Reading the course of events, and this is talking about reading, not in the sense of just words and letters, but also reading in the sense of interpreting what's going on in the course of events. There's a section called Facing Necessity, looks like it deals with God. Matters of Principle, dealing with values. Matters of Fact, that'll be really important for critical thinking. And finally, Drawing Conclusions. It begins with the chronology, but I'm going to turn us directly to the section I want to read for us today, which will give us a prompt for the first assignment. The first assignment is going to be to open this book and start reading, and try to read until you find a key quote that you think really matters. Either it matters to you personally or it matters to us as a country, and then you're going to read that quote aloud and post it on Flipgrid. All right, so I want to give you a feel for academic writing by doing a little bit with you. So this is called a read-along. We're reading from chapter 12 on doing things with words. What does it do is the first question that I ask myself. If the chapter is called Doing Things with Words, I'm like, well, what does it do, the Declaration? The Declaration, then, is a memo that records a decision on the part of the colonists to break from Britain. We also know what the Declaration thinks of its audience. It addresses itself in a philanthropic spirit to a candid world, inviting judgment. And as we know, too, what the Declaration does, this memo organizes a group of citizens and gives birth to a nation. This is an amazing critical thinking moment, is the use of critical thinking to give birth to a nation. A string of words, 1,337 of them to be exact, transforms a mass of people from one thing into another, from a set of colonies into a nation of United States. This leads to another important question. Notice I've marked the question in the text, and I'll be looking for the answer. How exactly does the Declaration do what it does? How do the parts of the text allow it to accomplish its work? This is to ask about the structure of the Declaration. The conventional approach to the Declaration structure is to divide it into blocks or texts. For instance, one scholar writes, the Declaration can be divided into 5 sections: the introduction, the preamble, the indictment of George III, the denunciation of the British people, and the conclusion. But it's impossible to divide the Declaration into actions. That's where she differs with other scholars. She's distinguishing what she's doing here from what others are doing. In the first paragraph, the signers indicate that they will declare the reasons for their actions. And this is super important in critical thinking, declaring your reasons, giving reasons for your position. And she quotes the declaration, "A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." And then second, in the second paragraph, they submit facts to witnesses. And facts are super important to critical thinking too. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Notice that you don't have to know what all the words in the text mean. For example, what's a usurpation? And what does she mean by candid? So you can get the general meaning without understanding every word. Although a super close reading would be to stop and look it up. In this case, we're not reading that closely, so let's go on. Then, after listing the injuries done to the colonies, the Declaration formally declares independence. "We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, do solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states." Finally, the text concludes with a pledge. It concludes with a pledge. I mean, the only pledge that comes to mind when I think of a pledge is the Pledge of Allegiance. But this is actually before the Pledge of Allegiance was written. This pledge states, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." We do? Do you? I mean, when I read this, I was like, wow, I didn't realize that was the level of commitment that I was making as a citizen in American democracy. It made me stop and think. That might be a time where you want to turn to your journal and take a note. I'm going to move on. The Declaration does what it does then, bravely giving birth to a new political entity in 4 concrete steps: declaring reasons, presenting facts to witnesses, declaring independence, and making pledges. These are the parts that, taken together, assembled into a word machine of sorts. A word machine. A word machine. That's cool. A word machine. That's also an analogy. Notice I write directly in my text. So the 4 steps that enable the the Declaration of Independence to do what it does are declaring reasons, presenting facts to witnesses, declaring independence, and making pledges. These make it a kind of machine. To quote John Adams' opponent, it's a machine to make something happen. To understand how the Declaration does what it does, to understand how the Declaration does what it does, wait, I got lost. That happens. We have to understand the interaction among these parts. Okay, so these 4 parts, these 4 steps: facts, reasons, declaring, and making pledges. In order to do that, declaring reasons, presenting facts, declaring that a new state of affairs obtain, and making pledges, these are familiar actions, just like what a bride and groom do when they marry. What? Notice this is another analogy. Consider in front of witnesses 2 people pledge themselves to each other, and the judge or religious official concludes the ceremony by saying, "I now declare you spouses." As philosophers have shown, what happens at a wedding can teach us a lot about language. It can also teach us a lot about the Declaration. If we follow out this metaphor, also sometimes called a metaphor and analogy are not the same thing, but closely related, we will understand better how the actions of the Declaration fit together. So what we can see from this is that if we follow this out, so keep reading, and we're going to read more about the comparison between what the people that declared the birth of our nation have in common with 2 people that declare their loving commitment to each other for life. That's kind of cool. Okay, so that's a read aloud. And I covered the section in the book, chapter 12, on doing things with words, from Daniel Allen's book. And so you might be thinking to yourself, why are we reading this book? And here's some of my reasons. I'm declaring my reasons to you for why we're reading this book. First of all, it provides an awesome example of the power of critical thinking in the act of writing, in the power of critical thinking to make a new reality come into being. It makes me wonder, what could I do in 1,300 words? What could you do in 1,300 words? It's inspirational. Also, it's at the center of an interesting, timely controversy. You can read about it on the inside cover. Notice in the title, Daniel Allen says that this reading of the Declaration is in defense of equality. When she says it's a reading in defense of equality, it lets you know that there are other people that have done other readings where they have defended the meaning of the Declaration on other grounds. Most prominently in our tradition, people have defended the Declaration as a matter of liberty. So this offers us an opportunity to clarify values. Where do you stand? What are your values? And then finally, whoops, earthquake. Finally, what are you going to do with what you've read? So I'd like you to start reading this book and read for a key quote. What's a key quote? A key quote is something that's meaningful to you, also meaningful in terms of this project that we're working on, and you're going to read it out loud on Flipgrid and tell us why it's meaningful to you in just a few words. That's the fun part.